Gen Z is coming out and coming in strong. 1 in 5 now identify as LGBTQ, and that's not just a trend, it's a cultural earthquake. But what's exactly behind this dramatic change? Is it a generational awakening, or is there more beneath the surface? Find out in this episode of The Infographic Show why 20% of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. And don't forget to hit subscribe. The LGBTQ community, commonly just called queer as an umbrella, isn't a new thing. It's always been a part of society. Throughout history, you'll find stories of people who lived a little differently, even if there was no term for them. Maybe it was a Roman emperor who loved dressing in women's clothing, because really, who's gonna stop him? Or a woman who donned a suit to land a job that no woman could get, and maybe kept wearing it long after hours. Then there's that pair of World War II veterans who never married, opened a flower shop, lived together for 55 years, and were buried side by side. Just close friends? Sure, let's go with that. But there is no question, the culture is now more open than it's ever been. It's generally considered to have gone mainstream with the riots at the Stonewall Tavern in New York, and since then, the community has seen big advances. First, they were fighting for representation on TV, and then for gay marriage. Today, many of the hot-button topics center around the attempts to ban books centering around queer characters, and the rights of transgender people to play sports or use bathrooms as the gender they live as. And while there has been increased pushback, the movement doesn't look like it's backing down anytime soon. And that is partially because the children are the future. When it comes to social issues, younger generations almost always lead the way. Progress tends to move in one direction, forward. Once something is legalized or widely accepted, it's rarely rolled back. The momentum sticks. This was definitely the case with civil rights, with marijuana, and with gay marriage. The one exception is abortion, which has a much stronger religious element and sees similar patterns across generations. But in the case of gay marriage, polls indicate that 74% of millennials and 69% of Gen Z support keeping it legal. And whether you like it or not, for 1 month of the year, it's impossible to avoid this movement. Pride Month in June every year started out as an underground rebellion against a repressive society that refused to let people be themselves. Since then, it's turned into an open celebration of everything rainbow, with massive parades held in most major cities around the world. And of course, when there's a profit to be made, the corporations are on the case. Big companies are known to cloak themselves in the rainbow and sell branded Pride merch every year. Some queer people snark about rainbow capitalism, but others say that it shows that catering to them is more profitable than catering to their opponents. And the future of the movement is likely to rest in the hands of a single generation. Gen Z may still be in their teens, but the oldest amongst them, born in 1997, are already young adults. In fact, that means the oldest ones are already approaching 30, which is in no doubt causing an existential crisis. And the current group of young people is having a huge impact on the culture. They're tech-savvy, politically polarized, and very into short-form online content, and one of the most diverse groups we've ever seen. And they're also, if you believe the polls, very queer. According to a 2023 poll, 7.6% of Americans identify as being on the LGBTQ spectrum. That number has more than doubled since a similar poll back in 2012. However, when you look specifically at Gen Z, you get an even more surprising number. A whopping 28% of Gen Z Americans identify as queer. And it's likely the number is going to keep growing. It's enough to make you wonder if, as your weird Uncle Lester keeps insisting, the government is putting something in the water to turn everyone gay. But the actual answer might be a lot closer to home. There are many theories about why this is happening, and the most likely answer is that people haven't actually changed, society has. For the longest time, it wasn't safe to openly identify as queer. At first, the pressing threat was the police. Not only was it illegal for gay people to get married for most of history, but sodomy laws weren't even repealed by the Supreme Court until the early 2000s. For parents, there was the threat of losing their children if they came out of the closet. And of course, there was the social stigma as well. It was common for queer teenagers to be kicked out of the house or sent to camps that claimed that they could cure people of their homosexuality. And so as society has changed, so did the people in it. While laws can change, some people in society will never be accepting of the community. But the balance has tilted. A parent who kicks their queer kid out of the house might lose a lot of friends. A baker who refuses to bake a cake for a gay marriage will likely face a costly legal battle, even if he ultimately wins the argument that he can't be forced to work with a client he doesn't agree with. And a soccer hooligan who beats up a gay man will find himself in the dock facing hate crimes charges in most areas. And that means that more people than ever finally feel safe to be themselves. And it's not just young people. There's been a noticeable rise in LGBTQ elders coming out later in life. Take 72-year-old comic book writer Jenny Blake Isabella, who came out as a trans woman in 2025. But what about the kids? They didn't grow up in this previous world. The reason for the shift among the younger might be even bigger. As the world's attitudes toward queer people shift, so does the culture around it, and it's never been easier to see a positive portrayal of queer characters in the media. During the 80s and 90s, most portrayals of gay characters centered around homophobia or AIDS. The first exposure many people had was the tragic musical Rent, which saw a diverse group of friends in New York slowly dwindle from the AIDS crisis. Even the more positive, lighthearted portrayals, like the comedy The Birdcage, would frequently center around trying to hide the truth or struggling with coming out. But especially for teenagers, the world has changed. These days, it's hard to turn on a teen drama without spotting at least one queer character. Even iconic heroes are joining in. Recent comic arcs have revealed one of the Robins and Superman's son as bisexual. In the middle grade and young adult literature world, queer books are a massive moneymaker, and even the most famous entertainment company in the world has gotten in on it. Disney broke new ground in the 2020s with The Owl House, a fantasy cartoon series that saw a bisexual girl travel to another realm and fall in love with a young witch. And supporters say that this normalization of young queer characters makes kids struggling with their identity feel more comfortable and accepted. But could it be actually changing the identity of some kids? Detractors of this new wave of diversity on kids and teens TV and books say it's putting ideas into kids' heads before they're ready, introducing them to concepts that they would have no idea about without it. To which those advocating for queer kids say, have you ever tried to keep information away from kids? Those who grew up in the dawn of the internet era remember just how quickly boys figured out that they could search for adult content. Today, almost every kid grows up with a smartphone in their hand, and every bit of information in the world at the tip of their fingers. And that's created a different world of LGBTQ culture than there ever was before. For those who remember the early days of the movement, it used to be broken down much more into specific groups. The gay rights movement, largely centered around men who wanted the right to love other men, was the most prominent for a while. Lesbians, the ladies who love ladies, soon started speaking up and making sure their voices were heard as well. Bisexuals didn't start gaining widespread awareness for a while after that, and the trans community, whose core issues are very different, continues to battle to this day for understanding. While many trans people did play key roles in the early days of the movement, it was common for them to be misunderstood as cross-dressers instead. But today, the acronym is starting to feel a lot more like an alphabet. Those core 4 letters have been joined by a lot of other groups looking to make themselves known and get understanding and acceptance. Many people have tried to add additional letters onto the acronym, but confusion and the arguments about who actually belongs there have led to many groups just adding queer to the end. It acts as an omnibus label for anyone who identifies as part of this larger community and wants to join in the movement. And that's led to a lot of young people wondering, even if they don't fit under the first 4 letters, do they fit under the 5th? And for a surprising number, the answer is yes. According to the most recent poll, of the 28% who identify as queer, only 5% identify as gay or lesbian. The most predominant queer identities of the past are now seen as old hat. Instead, 15% identify as bisexual, by far the largest group. Additionally, 8% identify as something else. What's something else? Well, you have to ask the kids. This also doesn't take gender into consideration, and many young people are discovering that they don't fit into the standard classifications on that either. And that's left many parents responding to their kids' coming out moment with, huh? A lot of new identities, or at least new to many adults, are entering the fray. It's estimated that just over 2.8% of Gen Z identifies as transgender, which is by far the most of any generation. But it's kind of surprising, especially given how many times you hear about that group on cable news. While only 1 of 25 Gen Z members might be trans, that means that on average every high school class will have about 1 trans kid. That means that just about every school child will encounter a trans classmate on a daily basis. And it might have them asking some questions about their own identity, because Gen Z is also changing the definition of trans. During the early days of the trans movement, the focus was often heavily on passing. Many would move, starting over with a new name, and seek medical treatment that would help them erase any trace of the gender they were born as. This would include hormone treatment, clothing that would hide parts of their anatomy, and ultimately sex change surgery that would remove parts of their body that caused them gender dysphoria. This process was long and expensive and not accessible to many people, which often meant that people were forced into the choice of sacrificing a lot or not living as their true self. to which Gen Z seems to be saying, "You don't tell me what to do." One of the reasons that the trans population seems to be booming among Gen Z is that a lot of these obstacles have now been removed. It's common for trans kids to simply announce their new identity and take on a new name and new clothing and mannerisms before they can even think about any medical treatment. Some identify as trans from a young age and are only known as their identified gender by their friends. And while sex change surgery for minors is exceedingly rare, it's more common for them to have access to hormone replacement therapy to help the transition. And for many, the answer to their gender is none of the above. So what exactly is non-binary anyway? The answer is, it depends. The non-binary identity is one that spun out of the trans movement, and it reflects someone who doesn't feel like either gender fully represents who they are inside. Some non-binary people transition socially or take hormone replacement therapy. Others are comfortable with how they look and feel and just want people to acknowledge them with the correct pronouns and terms. As this identity doesn't come with any real rules, it's one that many teenagers feel comfortable taking on to reflect that they don't fit into a box. And sometimes none of the above really means that. The most common variation of LGBTQ is LGBTQA. And no, the A does not stand for ally, despite what your mom said after she attended Pride and Support one year. It typically refers to the A spectrum, asexual, aromantic, and agender. This reflects the community that simply does not feel the same urges most people do. Asexuals typically don't have a sex drive and don't consider it an important part of their life. Aromantics might enjoy sex, but they don't feel romantic connections. And agender people are a subset of non-binary people who simply don't identify as any gender and generally feel that the fuss over gender is pretty silly. Some people say that this new spectrum is yet another way to indoctrinate kids. But can you really be mad about someone not wanting to do something? However, there is a legitimate question: is this a bandwagon effect? If there's one thing we know about teenagers, it's that they want to belong. Everyone remembers that one craze in high school. Everyone in school had it, one that your mom just didn't get. Well, maybe you mowed lawns for 3 months to get the money for that new video game system, or you begged your grandpa until he bought you those new pair of jeans. It might not have been about the game or the clothing, but simply about the feeling of belonging and getting to share in something with the cool kids. So what happens when it's not a thing, but it's an identity? Being queer has never been more accepted than it is over the last few decades. And that goes double for in schools, especially in liberal areas. At high schools and colleges, it's typical to have an LGBTQ club that holds meetings, protests, social hours, and events. When Pride Month rolls around, they usually go all out, and that might make some kids feel like they wish they could belong. And it might make some start thinking about their identity a little more closely and maybe discover that one of those letters fits them after all. And there is one other big factor that might be changing everything. Social media is a very mixed bag in terms of information, but there is no question it's made it possible for people to communicate like never before. 30 years ago, if you had a niche interest, you were relegated to boring your friends about it. Now it's easy to just search on Reddit or Google it and find a group of taxidermists, fans of an obscure sci-fi series, or support groups for just about any identity. And that's made it easy for kids with questions about their identity to find someone to answer their questions and support them on their first step of the journey. And that's led many parents to wonder if they're being cut out of the equation. In the past, parents would often be the first person a young person would come out to. But today, it's common for kids to have a whole support network of fellow queer teens, often around the world, cheering them on as they figure out their identity. That, combined with the growing media representation for the community, have led conservatives to say that kids aren't being supported, they're being groomed. They argue that the media and culture has made identifying as queer so attractive that kids are choosing to join the club so they can make new friends, get cool new accessories, and join the latest trend. To which queer people have said, "Have you actually tried to be queer in public lately?" While it's true that on the legal fronts it's definitely easier to be queer than it used to be, there are some troubling trends. The pushback against the movement has gotten more vocal. Target saw organized right-wing boycotts in response to their 2024 Pride collection, with several influencers filming themselves causing disruptions in the store. The big box store chain decided to dial back their Pride output in 2025, which made other people angry and led to boycotts from the left. Additionally, school board meetings and library meetings have become battlegrounds, and more politicians have begun vocally calling for rolling back many of the advances the queer community has gained. In June 2025, the infamously conservative Southern Baptist Church passed a resolution calling for the repeal of gay marriage. which has made many people think that there might be some safety in numbers. As queer people see their identities become political ping-pong balls, it's made many think that it's time to go back to the old ways, organizing and protesting and making sure that the community is seen as a welcoming place for newcomers. Of course, that's taken on a very different element now that we live in a global online community. Activists can reach out and spread information about how to know if you're queer, how to stand up for your rights, and how to find people like you. And it might be that today's young people have fewer connections than they used to in other areas. One of the most controversial theories about the Gen Z LGBTQ boom essentially says that identifying as queer has often replaced other identities in the modern day. It's been criticized heavily, but it is true that today's young people spend a lot less time in public and a lot more time online. There are fewer places to hang out, like at the mall or arcades. Today's teens are less likely to be involved in school activities and sports, and church and community activities have decreased. So that leaves them with a lot more time to hang out online and then ponder some of those feelings and questions that they've been having. And the result is a new community that is bigger and it's growing all the time. If you ask the average Gen Z why they think they identify as queer, they're likely to respond with, "Why does it matter?" One of the biggest factors in this change might be that it's not nearly as big of an event as it used to be. In the past, the decision to come out as gay or transgender came with a lot of unpredictability. Even if your parents were accepting, the odds were good that some friends or family members wouldn't be. While there is no guarantee of a soft landing today, a lot of teenagers and young people have grown up in a world where it is so normalized that they can simply wake up, brush their teeth, come out of the closet, and then ask mom what's for breakfast that morning. And there is one other big factor: time keeps marching on. Gen Z isn't the first generation to come of age during an LGBT-friendly era. Millennials mainly grew up as the movement was becoming mainstream for the first time, and by the time that they were in college or early adulthood, gay marriage seemed like an inevitable advance. The generation is highly liberal, educated, and likely to approve of LGBTQ culture, and while they don't identify as such in the same numbers as Gen Z, they have a far higher percentage than older generations, almost 15%, and many of them have kids too. In fact, many millennials have Gen Z kids. If an older millennial had a kid at 21, that kid would actually be in college now. And that means that there are some millennials who are grandparents already. And when you're done screaming internally at the inevitable passage of time, think about this. That means that many of the Gen Z kids who grew up with millennial parents already grew up in a household where being queer was normalized and accepted. They may have been exposed to media normalizing queer characters from an early age, and they felt very little anxiety if they felt like they wanted to come out. So, is this pattern likely to continue? The outlook may be cloudier than you think. While Gen Alpha is digital natives like the older generation, they've shown to be susceptible to misinformation and extremism as spread by social media platforms like TikTok. There are fears of a right-wing boom among this younger generation, which means that their parents may find themselves yelling, "Go to your room," until you can respect and validate your sister's identity. Whether Gen Alpha carries the rainbow flag forward or drops it is still to be determined. If you think that Gen Z is shaking things up, wait until you hear what other cultures are getting up to. Check out the weirdest sex customs around the world to see what really goes on between the sheets, or click on this video instead.